Welcome back to our panel discussion, Strategies to Provide Equitable Access and Prevent Identity Fraud in Government, sponsored by LexisNexis Risk Solutions here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Sanjay Gupta, the Chief Technology Officer at the Small Business Administration. John Yuta is an identity strategist at the General Services Administration. Patrick Nemeth is the Identity Operations Division Director at the Office of Biometric Identity Management at Homeland Security. And Andrew McClenahan, Solutions Architect for the Government Division at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And we were talking about the identity challenge for people, Americans, especially in the context of equitable access. Before the break, we were discussing the issue that they don't often have the data trail that would enable the easy ID management that we have for people that, have that big digital identity trail to them. So, John, at GSA, I know this is an issue that your agency is very concerned with in the service of equitable access and also security.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it can get tricky for a couple of reasons. But at the end of the day, there is almost always some previous interaction that you can start to build that trust upon. So perhaps someone is unbanked, they don't have a bank account, but they may have received SNAP at some point. So there may be an interaction with some government agency there, or perhaps they are registered to vote. This points back to the latency issue, because again, these systems may not be set up to do a fast turnaround here. But we're starting to explore a broader range of this kind of interaction, as well as things that are a little bit less conventional. Perhaps they were a student at a community college at some point, and there may have been an ID issued. Perhaps they're an immigrant, and we can figure out how to get into the data that Customs and Border Patrol has about their initial port of entry. There's not a lot good stuff there today. Today, a lot of this still comes down to hope they have a driver's license or some other state issued photo ID, and that they're able to come out in person. But tomorrow, not literally tomorrow, but in the future, where mail is delivered, where other interactions they've had with the government have been, we think can help solve this problem. The question is, how quickly can we get there? And we'd like to do it faster than slower for obvious reasons, but there's policy issues. We want to protect people's privacy as well. So it's trying to move as quickly as is responsible.
Andy, comment on that same topic.
Oh, equitable access. I mean, that's sort of the topic du jour right now, especially in this administration has taken a much higher priority level with that. I think some of the comments that were just made are right on point. The previous interaction, like for example, with SNAP, the data that's behind that associated with the identities for SNAP recipients is fiercely guarded to protect the identity of people who are on food assistance, and rightfully so to a point. But we still have a lot of agencies that are in a pre 9/11 world where they're not sharing data. And to the SNAP point, I mean, that is a legislative thing that would need to change in a farm bill or in the Code of Regulations. And so there are additional hurdles to the technology challenges that we have that lie outside of an IT solution, especially for the equitable access. To the point on unbanked, I mean, there's 50 million people right now that are either unbanked or they are underbanked, or they're just credit invisible. And that's not just identities, entities, small businesses. I mean, Sanjay probably has the numbers off the top of his head, but if 99% of the businesses in the country are small businesses, and it takes 5 years on average to establish a credit, then credit data is not going to be a reliable information for determining fraud characteristics and risk profiles for an entity. Same thing for individuals. But if we're talking about the unbanked or the underbanked, you're talking about an equitable issue. And 50 million Americans, that's a significant portion of population. So being able to use that data and then correctly linking it in that the absence of that social security number master client index world at LexisNexis, we use LexID, and you have to make sure that the information that you have there, it's not just a primary key, that we've got verifiable information, to Patrick's point, that connects it to that right person. And you can't rely on device information. So if only three quarters of the people who make under $30,000 a year have a smartphone. So device binding is also something that cannot become a static one-time fire and forget solution to helping out with the equitable access and the additional challenges that we've seen in the press lately about voice and facial recognition, if that is creating a disparate treatment of clients. And finally, I think that one of the issues that we really want to focus on for equitable access is of all the layers that we've talked about and all the technology solutions that we have, where are we putting those into the workflow process? Are we treating everybody like an imposter thief, where they have to upload and scan a document and then hope that information is going to be correctly matched, or we're gonna do a selfie or hold a picture up next to ourselves? I mean, that information should be at the end of a workflow. And it was said earlier about using all the digital identity information to be able to make those informed risk-based decisions prior to imposing more invasive or more friction. I mean, frictionless is not a good thing in a risk-based model, but being able to make those informed decisions.
Interesting. Yeah, you almost have to turn to art or fiction for an example here. There's a recent movie out about a woman who is alone and itinerant, and she doesn't have a fixed address except her van, and works, part-time for Amazon and moving around different warehouses from warm weather, cold weather. And, how do you reach a person like that and that is entitled to perhaps to, a government benefit? And it becomes difficult. So Sanjay, let's go back to you on that question. What do you see this all heading towards to maintain the equity, and especially with so many tiny entities that you are dealing with? Where are you going here, so that there's some future pathway to make sure that equity is built into the whole access situation?
Yeah, and equity is a very important aspect. So one of the solutions, in addition to what some of our fellow panelists have talked about, is for identity validation and proofing, the US Post Office is considering offering that as a service. And there's some impressive statistic, which I forget exactly, but it says something about like 99% of the US population is within, say, a few miles of a US postal office. And so that's an in-person proofing solution. And an individual can go into the post office and provide some few pieces of information about themselves, and then the post office can sort of confirm your identity and then pass that information on to another government entity. So that's still, I was in discussions with them, and them being the US Postal Service, they're looking to do a pilot within this fiscal year. And I'm hoping that'll start soon, because I think that will help towards it. I won't think that's the solution, but it's a part of the solution where we rely so much on technology to do the identity validation. So for the underserved and the, let's say, not fully connected parts of the US population, perhaps there's another avenue besides pure technology to be able to do their proofing. So that's one aspect and avenue which I'm hopefully looking at in a near future is a good way of doing it. But sort of going to the future, Tom, I think, and I've talked about this previously in other places as well, is I think it's time to reimagine the social security number that we've known. I think it's time to create a digital ID, which by definition is signed to each individual, and it follows through their entire life cycle. Because guess what? All agencies in some shape or form are providing services to citizens, whether they're citizens as an individual entity or there's a citizen who is a part of another entity called an organization or a small business or company, right? And so to me, that would help us, tremendously from an efficiency standpoint, if we start using some form of a digital identification that's assigned to individuals, and that becomes a way to be able to use it in an authoritative fashion as opposed to our current social security numbers, which are useful, but I think they have outlived their useful life. The other aspect is obviously exchanging information more freely across the broader government domains, which also have a lot of that information. There was examples of SNAP used or passports used, whether it's the Treasury or IRS, or the Department of Labor for that. There was some reference around unemployment insurance, or FEMA for that matter, or DHS for that matter. If we connect all those data sets, I think we can do more effective jobs in reducing the extent of fraud that's available. Granted, there are policy questions, of course, that sort of prohibit that, and there are good reasons why some of that policies were set in place, but I'm here to believe that it's time to reevaluate those policies. I'll just give one final point from a technology standpoint. Yes, I always have this conversation with people saying, well, this is highly PII or personally identifiable information, and I cannot share this. I'm here to say today technologies exist where you can share information that's highly confidential, highly sensitive, it's PII rich, but you're not disclosing that PII aspects, but you're using the other attributes of that data set that are associated with that sensitive PII information without actually disclosing that. That technology has been around, is available, is in common use. I think it's time for us to sort of bite the bullet there, and we start looking at those solution sets and saying, okay, the reasons why we were not sharing this were valid, say, a few years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Today, technological advances have allowing us to keep that information sensitive and private and confidential, but still be able to use the surrounding data around it. So that's sort of what I see in the future.
All right, I can smell blockchain coming here at some point along the line, but Patrick, in about the minute and a half we have left, we'll give you the final comment. Where does Homeland Security, where do you see this whole issue of solid identification, verification, security, and good access for all Americans headed as we look ahead down the line?
In our field, of course, any bias in the algorithms that the machines use or that the people use who are assisting those machines is a big area that we work with the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, NIST, in order to drive those numbers down as low as possible. In those situations, such as a natural disaster, where the people can't get to the machines, the government has ways of deploying various machines down there to assist in those biometric collections, used not only natural disasters, but also down on the border for unaccompanied youth, identifying the sponsors sometimes. And just finally, the passport photo, some other countries we deal with can't believe that we allow people to take their own photos and just send it in, because photo morphing can be done at any point along the chain. So perhaps the post office will move into that field too, to assure the integrity of passports and the entire chain of identity assurance.
All right. Well, lots to think about. I want to thank today's guests for a really deep discussion, and I think something we can take away some ideas and wisdom from. They are Sanjay Gupta, the Chief Technology Officer of the Small Business Administration, John Yuta, Identity Strategist at the General Services Administration, Patrick Nemeth, the Identity Operations Division Director at the Office of Biometric Identity Management at the Homeland Security Department, and Andrew McClenahan, Solutions Architect for the Government Division at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search LexisNexis Risk Solutions.